Well, no Hudson, and we start recording without any problems whatsoever. Unbelievable. Can't believe it. We're just up and rolling. This is a very, very exciting podcast. I am joined today by a living legend in the world of magic, a man who has had a magic career spanning over 65 years.
Make it 70.
The best news is it nearly 70 now, Chuck? Is it?
Yeah, I've gotten older.
Chuck Jones is our guest today, all the way from sunny California. Chuck, thank you so much for joining us on the What's Going On podcast. How are you today?
Yeah, very good, thanks.
So normally, Chuck, you might not know this. I normally have a co-host here, a guy called Alan Hudson, but unfortunately there was a bit of a mix-up and he hasn't been able to make it today. But actually, I think that's good, because sometimes a few of the listeners have said that when we have spoken to illusionists, he feels a little bit kind of left out of the conversation.
Okay.
So it just means you and me can talk about being an illusionist and lots of exciting things like tigers and elephants and touring without any interruptions for the next little while. Are you up for this? It should be fun.
Yeah, sure.
Great stuff. So we do, most of our listeners, about 60% of our listeners are in the UK. And so I feel it's best just to start this podcast for some people perhaps who are not familiar with your work, but you're obviously from America. And as I just mentioned, you've had a career spanning 7 decades now, which is quite incredible. And basically you've done everything, and we're going to talk about so many amazing things that you've done, not only from a performance point of view, but also there's some incredible illusions that magicians listening to this will know that they might not know you were the inventor of. So we're going to touch on that. But the thing that I wanted to start with, Chuck, if that's all right, is your kids' TV show. So from 1963 to 1966, 5 days a week, you had a kids' TV show which ran in California. Magicians sometimes in the UK here moan when they have to come up with an hour of material to do the Edinburgh Fringe Festival each year. What was it like having to come up with material 5 days a week for 3 years?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Very difficult. We didn't have a writer. I was the writer and performer and director. There was a TV director, of course, but yeah. So what it was in those days, particularly in America in the 60s, is the TV studios bought rights to show theatrical cartoons, Bugs Bunny cartoons and everything but Disney, I think. So they needed a live host to tie everything together. And a lot of these, at that time, a lot of the local stations didn't even have videotape. So they needed a live host to deliver commercials to the kids. So in a 2-hour show that I did every day, there was an hour of cartoons. There was a half hour of commercials, and sometimes live by me, and a half hour of live time that I had to fill. And of course it was, alternately, a cartoon, 3 minutes live, another cartoon, 3 minutes of commercial, whatever. So I attempted to do 3 different tricks every day, but these weren't sleight of hand things that take 2 years to perfect. These were hippity hop rabbits in the die box and the giant, the dwarf, and that kind of thing. And fortunately, I had purchased a collection of magic from a performer, Dell O Dell, which the young people would never have heard of. But so I had quite a collection of magic to draw from. And after about 3 weeks, I used up most of the material that I already knew. So I had to come up with new ideas, maybe new stories for the same trick. But out of that half hour of live time, it wasn't all magic. It was reading fan letters. It was telling jokes. It was I had a puppet rabbit out of a hat that I talked to, and there was a recorded voice that answered me. It was that kind of thing. So it wasn't all pure magic, of course.
And obviously, if you're on TV 5 days a week for multiple hours, a day, particularly in the 1960s. I imagine you became quite the local celebrity. How did it change your performing career? Was it a big? Did it make a big difference to your work?
Yeah, it did, of course. We did live personal appearances on Saturdays and Sundays, and then the show was Monday through Friday. Those personal appearances that we did, we'd get 1,000 kids lined up ready to meet Chuck Jones, the Magic Man, at a shopping mall or a shopping center, something like that. And we did 3 of these personal appearances all over LA. Uh, on a Saturday and usually 2 on a Sunday. So it kept us really busy.
What was the magic scene like in California at this time? If I can be so brash to ask you, Chuck, we don't need to ask your age, but if you were performing professionally in the 1960s in California, that must mean you've met a lot of these magicians that are now legendary performers that have like long passed. Could you throw some names at me for magicians that you've met that have now reached legendary status?
Uh, in those days, or since Al Goshman, uh, I remember Al Goshman had moved from Chicago to Los Angeles to perform at the Magic Castle. Uh, Al Goshman came up to my office at the TV studio and said, I know you're a magician. I know you have a TV show. I know there's a place called the Magic Castle. Can you tell me how to get there? So
Wow.
that's, yeah, that's,
At this point, how old was Goshman in at this sort of time? Was he a similar age to? Was he a young man, or was he already a bit older at this point? How old were we talking?
no, he was like in his 30s, probably.
Did you get to know Di Vernon at all?
Not really. Yeah, I met him. I talked to him. We worked together on shows where I'd be on stage and he'd be doing close-up magic uh, before the show started. Uh, we did a lot of corporate shows together,
Yeah.
but I didn't really know him. You know what I mean? Like some of the other guys that really talk, talk with him 5 hours a day and learned all of his stuff. So you have to remember, in those days, a close-up magic was not a viable occupation to have. You really didn't make any money doing close-up magic in the early 60s, in America at least. There were no venues except for the Magic Castle. That was probably the only place where you could actually get paid doing close-up magic. There wasn't walk around, there wasn't anything like there is today. Uh, so therefore, my interest in magic was always stage magic. So meeting Dave Vernon, I would, I knew his reputation, but I wasn't the kind of magician that wanted to latch on to him and learn his sleight of hand. You know what I mean?
Who were the performers at the time in the '60s that you were excited to mix with?
Uh, Actually, Billy McComb came to LA, and we had a lot of chats together, and I enjoyed talking with him. If I could speak to him, most of the time Billy did the entire conversation. It was hard to get a word in. Um, let's see, who was around in those days? Um, I spoke with on the phone and then in person Doug Henning and actually David Copperfield, the very young David Copperfield, uh, in the 60s still.
Actually, it's a good time to ask this. I was going to ask this later, but as you mentioned their names, I think now's a good time just to jump forward a little bit. What was it like in the '70s, '80s, and '90s being a traveling performing illusionist living in the era of these superstars of magic like Doug Henning and David Copperfield? Did we had Bill Smith on the podcast a few months ago, and Bill said when these big stars came around and when NBC made World's Greatest Magic that his business boomed. So that's interesting from a builder's point of view. As a performing magician, as you were, did these guys impact the amount of money you were making and the amount of work you were getting?
Uh, yeah, I would say that they did because when I, of course, had the kids' television show, I did no illusions at all. And then after that show, we performed throughout Los Angeles. We did these little one nighter variety shows. And as people would see Doug Henning on TV doing illusions, I realized that I had to put illusions in our act in order to compete. So, that was the transfer from just ordinary stage magic to performing illusions.
So the TV show ends in 1966. Um, Jan, your long-term partner and wife, I know in 1968 was around the time when you together created the Mismade Girl illusion. But talk to me, when did Jan first get added into your professional work?
It was probably at the end of the TV show when I went off the air, and then had to do these what we called club dates. Club dates meaning uh, performing at a moose lodge and an elks club and a women's club and all of these little 1 day ventures. Uh, and I needed that extra assistant to perform the illusions that we were adding to the show. So it was about 66, 67 that Jan started working actively on stage. And she had no experience at all, you know. She just learned it, picked it up, and did what she had to do. I told her to
So
get in a box and hide, and at the count of three, I'll turn it around and open the lid, and you'll pop out. That was it.
amazing. So a stage illusion that you invented that every magician will know, every magician will have seen, is the Mismade Girl illusion. It's a modern day classic,
Right.
and I mean, we've all seen variations of it over the decades. Every magician, illusionist, it feels at some point has probably owned one. Talk to me a little bit about the creation of this illusion. Where did it come from in your mind?
Actually, we were doing two illusions in our act, in our club act, in 30-minute act, and that was the canvas covered box, which is a version of the substitution trunk, and the room suspension. I wanted to add a third, and I had remembered my mentor earlier was Dell O Dell, a female magician, and she did a thing called Abbott's Divided Lady. And this was a vertical cabinet split in half, and uh, a person was in the cabinet, handcuffed, chained, couldn't move, but you never saw the person. So it was a sawing in half without actually seeing a head and feet, whatever. And I said we could build that, but Jan being so tiny, I said we could do it with three boxes and
Ah.
instead of two. And she said, wouldn't it be funny if you put the boxes together the wrong way? So that was the first concept of the Mismade Girl. Then I carried it from there and I said, well, you know, you would not know that the boxes were the wrong way unless you could see the head and the feet and the stomach, right? So all of a sudden that meant that it couldn't be the divided lady that Abbott's had in their catalog. It had to be a different method, and because we now had to show the body parts. And then I had a choice of doing it with four boxes or three boxes. Three boxes without a base, four boxes with a base. And I happened to mention that to a fellow performer, Bev Bergeron. So that's how Bev entered the picture. Bev, of course, says he gave me the idea for Mismade Girl. And what actually happened was I asked him, this is what we want to do. do you think we ought to do it with 3 boxes or 4 with a base? And he said, oh, it has to be 4 with a base because Mark Wilson does a stack of boxes with 4 and a base. And that's how that idea came about. Uh, the saddest part of the Mismade Girl was it took too long to rearrange the boxes to put her back together again. The climax of the trick was showing her mixed up. So it took about 4 years for me to figure out how we could put her back together without taking the boxes apart and rearranging them and restacking them and open the doors. And we
And
found
in the presentation, we see you do this by rearranging the numbers on the front, don't we?
right, and that came
But
about.
that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about what's going on inside that needed
Right,
some real thinking
the
about, right?
mechanics. So I figured out the mechanics. Now I had to figure out why she could be put together, restored, so to speak, without having to rearrange the boxes. And that came from Orson Welles. Orson Welles rented my first Mismade Girl,
Yeah.
and he said, you know, not everybody has color TV, so they will not understand that the boxes are different colors. So they will not know that the boxes are mixed up unless we put numbers on them. Can I put numbers on your Mismade Girl boxes for me to use on TV? And I said, sure. And and his presentation was once the girl was mixed up, to just cut the trick there, get a laugh, and push the whole illusion off stage without restoring the girl at all. But I had remembered the idea of the numbers on the boxes, and my thinking was, what if you just rearranged the numbers? That might give a reason for the girl being restored without having to restack the boxes. So what happened was, it took almost a minute and 45 seconds after you saw the girl mixed up to put her back together again. As I said, Orson didn't bother to put her back together again. That was the end of the trip. Uh, by new mechanics on the insides of the boxes, we cut that to 25 seconds. So pulling out the blades, rearranging the numbers, and her popping out was now 25 seconds. And so,
Chuck, can I ask you a question that might sound a little bit strange, but I will never probably get the chance to ask anybody else this. What does it feel like knowing? Also, it's something I know I'll never get to experience. What does it feel like knowing you've created a piece of magic that will long outlive you, that you know will be done, in shows and pantomimes here in the UK and circuses and probably easily 100 years from now? Do you ever think about that? Or, what does that feel like? Know that your career has this thing that it will be, an illusion that you've created that will be remembered long after we're all gone.
yeah, I never really thought about it that way. I was unhappy, of course, uh, the first time it was copied and performed, and and that was because the builder of the first Mismade Girl was Owen Magic, and that's how Owen Magic got into the picture and said they invented it, based on other tricks that were already in their catalog. So Owen Magic sold 3 or 4 of them without my knowledge and without my credit, and that made me unhappy, of course. And then as I watched, Doug Henning was one that really made the trick popular. Not me, but in the magic show on Broadway. And he called me personally when he found out that I was the inventor of it. I also found out how he put that trick in the Broadway show by going to the showroom of Owen Magic and seeing this prop sitting there, which was Mismade Girl, not knowing what it was. And basically, Owen Magic told him it was a brand new effect and he should put it in the show, and he did. So actually, he used the trick more than I did at the beginning, exposed it to more people. That was not a good feeling, of course.
I can only imagine. Yeah, absolutely. Um, Chuck, one of the things on this podcast over the years, we have talked about every different kind of performance space where you can do magic. We've talked about stage shows, close up, corporate, weddings, cruise ships, everything. There's one thing we've never talked about, and I want to talk to you about it because I know it's a way you made your living for many, many years, and it's the mall show,
Oh,
performing
yeah,
in a shopping center. Now, obviously, many people are too young, but the reality is when malls first opened, they became a new day out, didn't they? They were an exciting new thing that people would drive many miles to visit. And you hit upon this idea of doing magic shows in the mall. Do you want to tell the story? How does that all come about? And I know it probably, we don't often talk about money on this podcast, as regular listeners will know, but I assume it was probably a fairly lucrative part of your career because at points, I know you had several shows out all at the same time, didn't you? But how
that's
did the
right.
first mall show come about?
It was a local mall in Los Angeles, and I contacted them because when these malls were
Ah,
opening, they were in competition with another mall, especially in Los Angeles, where you could go 5 miles and there'd be another mall, another 5 miles and another mall. So they were in competition with each other, and they were buying attractions, paying for attractions to come into the mall. Traditionally, uh, we were babysitters. We attracted an audience and then worked for the kids sitting down on the ground. But the parents had to bring the kids to the mall to see the show. And I had just finished the TV show a few years before, so I had kind of a name. So it was an easy sell to sell a mall our magic show. The problem came about when 3 or 4 malls all wanted the same date at the same time, same date, and I could only do one of these jobs. And I realized then if I had another unit that I could send out under my name, but it couldn't be another magician. So the second unit turned out to be a story about a magician. And by the way, I should mention that one of the reasons I was successful doing these mall shows is everything was self contained. We provided our own stage. Eventually, the stage had a proscenium, a curtain, totally enclosed so that the kids couldn't go around to the back of the stage and grab a prop or anything. It was totally constructed on a platform on wheels, basically, which was a trailer. The second unit we built was a trailer that you would envision uh, as a normal trailer, except the side dropped open, and that was provided a proscenium and a performing space. Uh, so at that time, we had both of those shows, my show and the show that I had produced, booked. And occasionally we had a third show booked at the same time. Uh, we probably did in the 5 western states in America, we probably did about 40 malls a year between these shows, and uh,
wow.
and they were 4 day shows. It was a package that I sold them, 4 days, 4 shows a day, and 3 days off, and move to another mall and do another setup. So at that time, I probably made more money with those mall shows than I did in later years. I was at the MGM
Wow.
Grand in Reno. and made a very good salary, but I spent a lot of money in order to get into that show and to do that show. And it cost so much for costumes and music and new illusions and all of that, that by the time everything was said and done, it was just a nice salary, but it wasn't, you know, the original money that I thought I was going to be making because of all the costs. But the mall shows, I had a budget and it was all figured in. And yeah, so putting it all together, and because there were so many performances, I probably made more money in those days than
Of course,
later
the
on.
shopping malls now, they're all dying off. And did that work just eventually just dry up? Did
Oh, yeah.
they start to cut costs? Was that, and what sort of time was that when it, or was it that you just got other better gigs and you know
Well,
you
all
weren't around to
along,
do
I
it?
got better gigs, yes. Um, but thank goodness, because then the mall shows did disappear, and malls that were still around were not paying for attractions. In fact, they had attractions that paid the mall to come in. So there was no longer that market. It just totally died out. And that's the one thing about doing magic for 70 years. I've noticed, how should I say, the market that you are successful in will disappear, and you have to move into another market. Uh, so what happened with me is, as these mall shows were disappearing, I was building a full evening illusion show, little by little, and I went that route, you know. And
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I think that's so interesting, isn't it? I think everybody, I mean, you obviously have had several eras of your career, but it is just a fact quite often that the venues that you perform in can just disappear. Happened here in the UK many years ago. Paul Daniels, Wayne Dobson, these guys that are legends, they, got good in these working men's clubs. They just don't exist anymore. It's not, the venue does not exist. The summer seasons that they used to do in the seaside towns, they just don't exist. Also, you remind me, you talked about your trucks briefly there. I've seen a photo of yours where you are on top of a truck.
right.
Was this for publicity, or was this the early days of the mall shows? Or,
No,
but
this is
literally, a truck you
this
used to drive around in and used to perform on top of it. I remember.
right. So what it is, that was in the days of the kids television show, and we would do these personal appearances on the weekends, and there was literally no crowd control. The wherever we performed, a little small shopping center. There weren't the big malls yet; they hadn't started yet. So there were small shopping centers. We had no crowd control, and the first thing I found out is they would provide a platform, and we would perform, and the kids were crowding around, grabbing at the props, grabbing at the costume, like a wild birthday party situation. So, in order to prevent the kids from grabbing the props, and in order to have a real performing area, uh, again, we had our own traveling stage. But I decided to put it on top of the truck. Now, this is for the people that can't see a picture of it. This was like a delivery truck. Okay, so the roof of the truck, and you could stand up in the truck. So the roof of the truck is probably about 9 feet off the ground. Uh, so I took it to Owen Magic after I bought the truck, and I said, put a platform up there for me, make a hole in the roof, put a ladder on the inside of the truck, and I will go up the ladder. The kids can't reach me at all and grab at my costume. Go up to the top and perform on the truck, on the top of the truck. And that's what we did. We did a full show, including the broom suspension to close out the show. And that was built on top of the truck. Now, what it did
Amazing.
was it made the audience move away from the truck about anywhere from 10 to 12 feet because they couldn't see me. They couldn't see the show if they were right up against the truck, you see, because it was too steep. So they had to move back,
Yeah.
and that gave me my crowd control.
Now, Chuck, I have spoken to many great magicians on this podcast. I have spoken to magicians who vanished the Statue of Liberty. I have spoken to magicians who put a bag on their head and pop balloons. And today I finally get to speak to a magician, yourself, who has vanished an elephant. This is a first for me, to speak to a magician who vanished an elephant. How
There have
much of a
been
pain
many,
in...
of course.
Of course, there's been many, but I've never spoken to anybody else who has done it. How much of a pain in the ass was that illusion to put together? Can you give us the inside scoop?
Yeah, it was. I only, of course, did it once for a television show for HBO, HBO TV, and it was at their request. I had to have something in my act or on that show that they hadn't done before, and probably the public hadn't seen, and something they could billboard the show with. They said, "So what about, we had Mark Wilson, he vanished an automobile. What if you could vanish an elephant?" Doug Henning had already done this, of course, but on TV. So I said, "Yeah, we can build that." So I came up with a new version of vanishing an elephant. And we did it once, and then trashed the problem.
Where'd you get the elephant?
Oh, that was through a trainer that provided animals, exotic animals, for television motion pictures. It's in Los Angeles. It's kind of easy to do that. There are a number of animal trainers that would provide exotic animals for motion pictures. So how we found that trainer with the elephant, I don't know. But subsequently, that same elephant was used by Harry Blackstone Jr. in his traveling show. And I don't remember if he vanished the elephant or produced the elephant. I think he produced the elephant in his traveling show. It was the same elephant.
You've mentioned Los Angeles just then, and for all magicians, of course, when we think of Los Angeles, the first thing we think of is the Magic Castle. It's absolutely incredible, Chuck. I know just a few months ago you were performing there, and it's just you're amazing, and it's great that you're still going. How long have you been a member of the castle, and how has it changed over the years? And I will be blunt and ask you: do you think it's changed for the better or not?
Uh, as far as the castle goes, financially, because there have been a number of times through the course of the history of Magic Castle where they almost went under. They were on the verge of bankruptcy. So now that they are a financial success, it's better for the Magic Castle. As far as being a clubhouse for magicians, you can't go up there on an evening and sit across the table from Guy Vernon and say, "Show me a card trick." That doesn't happen anymore. You know, um, I think uh, they're trying to get uh, famous magicians, out of town magicians, to come in as a resident magician and be like the Guy Vernon or the Al Goshman that used to be there. But quite frankly, Magic Castle has 400 people a night in the building, and it just it isn't right for that kind of atmosphere anymore. So, as far as a clubhouse for magicians, it it's not like it used to be.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Now, one of the things that obviously I know about you, you won't know this, Chuck, but I consider myself a bit of a broadcast journalist. So I've done my research on you, and I know you have literally travelled all over the world. And actually, you've had the most extraordinary gig for like 30 years, which is that
Yeah.
you in New Zealand, and you just go back year after year after year after year. And I'm very aware that it was the first place you encountered a raked stage. Now, for magicians,
Yeah.
this for magicians who do stand up or smaller scale magic or comedy magic, they probably don't quite understand what a challenge that can be if you're a stage illusionist. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the first time you encountered a rake stage in New Zealand?
Yeah. First time was now some of those shows early on in New Zealand were in these old opera houses, and they still had hand lines. They didn't have even counterweight system to pull curtains, and they had a rake stage. And in school, I learned that upstage came from that term, upstage and downstage, came from a rake stage. Upstage was the back of the stage, and it was really up, and downstage, the front of the stage, was actually lower because the stage was tilted.
I,
So,
I'll be honest. I've just learned something there, and I've been on
oh, you
stages for
didn't know that?
years.
Yeah.
That makes complete sense. Of course. Why
That's
did I not know
that's where
that?
that term upstage and downstage came.
Unbelievable.
So
I've just learned something. Great.
anyway, the stages were raked because a lot of times the audience, the house, was not raked. They were flat floors, and the music halls in the UK were flat floors. So all those music halls, and we played a couple of them on a very short tour that we did, a 1 week tour in the UK with a couple other magicians, Terry Seabrook and uh, Ricky Dunn, God love him, the pickpocket, and our illusion show. And I remember we got to Leeds, and they had booked as a venue for this show uh, the music hall. This stage was so tilted that we nailed boards on the floor. We literally put nails on the stage floor with boards so that the props would not roll into. There wasn't an orchestra pit, but there would have been a band in front of the stage. And in order to prevent the props from going right off the stage, we let them rest against the board. We had a levitation that wouldn't work because it was so tilted that the mechanism jammed. And so we had to put boards under the wheels, the front part of it, to level the levitation in order to make it work.
I know you went from New Zealand and then also you've done Australia, and in Australia you've performed in the round. How do you do that as a stage illusionist?
Oh yeah, that was the first time I went to Australia, and we were there for an event called Expo '88. So it was 1988. That was the first time in that part of the world for us to perform, and I knew, of course, ahead of time, the venue was a circus type atmosphere, totally surrounded. A bullfight and a ring, and there's a tunnel that the bulls would come out of, and maybe the bullfighter would come out of. That's what they had in this circus ring, and that's where our illusions entered and exit. But everything had to be done on the round. It had to be an illusion that required no special lighting and had no angle problems. And then generally we had to rotate the illusion in a circle so that the audience could see all around what was going on. So something like a broom suspension, a crystal box worked well. We did do the Mismade Girl, and once we showed the mismade part of the girl, we turned the illusion around in a circle so that everyone could see the body parts and so on. What was funny about that is the first part of the audience saw the girl mixed up and they chuckled. But the people, three-quarters of the audience, could not see her mixed up until we started to turn it. As we turned it, there was a bigger laugh. As we turned it more,
Amazing.
there was a bigger and bigger laugh. And finally, at the end, it was just everyone was laughing like crazy. And the psychology was, what are these other people laughing at? And as we turned the box around, oh
They'd
my
get it.
gosh, that's what they're
Yeah.
laughing at. And so the laughs got bigger and bigger. But yeah, so yeah, working totally in the round was a challenge.
For all these years, of course, you've toured with your partner Jan, and I know there was a long period of time actually where your daughter was in the show as well. What are the that sounds quite intense to me, traveling with your family. What are the pros and the cons of that? Because that can't always be roses, both working and performing with your immediate family.
No, that's right. Yeah, a lot of difficulties, a lot of difficulties. Uh, so, there might be arguments off stage, but once you're on stage, everyone just performed like normal, and there was no anger or anybody upsetting anybody else.
But I guess the biggest thing is you're not, obviously you've done an enormous amount of traveling. You've not been, as a lot of performers are, cruise ship guys, you're not away from your family all the time. So it had was that the reason really you brought the family into the act, was so you ultimately weren't going to be missing home all
Well,
the time
it
over all
started
these
out
years?
was it was cheaper to have your wife in the show than paying an assistant, right? So it was more of a financial thing at the beginning. And I remember Stacy used to when she was 4 and 5 years old, we put
This
her
is
in
your
the act.
daughter, Stacey,
Yes,
yes?
yeah, yeah. And so she was in the act, carried out the spot card and handed it to me, and a few simple things like that. And then as she got older, she didn't want to have anything to do with magic, nothing to do with magic at all. Her friends, she didn't tell her friends that, you know, that we were in show business or doing magic. And then about, I don't know, she was maybe 17 or 18 years old. And she said, "Oh, Dad, um, there's a magician. I think it was Les Arnold. Uh, Les Arnold and Dazzle. Some people would know that name. Anyway, so I think it was Les Arnold. They called her and said, Stacy, I need an assistant for Thursday night. Uh, would you help me? And she asked my permission to work with Les Arnold. So uh, she did this a couple of times over a few weeks. And I said, I hire a girl assistant. Why don't you work on our show? And she says, oh, but because Les Arnold pays me.
Right, right. Amazing.
So, yeah.
I've had a great time the last couple of days, Chuck, just going through YouTube, watching lots of video clips of you, and regular listeners of this podcast may remember Fernando Velasco was on the podcast a few months ago. He's one of my best friends, and he considers you his mentor. You've obviously helped him a great deal over the years. What was the reason for that? Why have you decided to help Fernando so much? What did you see something in him as a young kid, or what was it specifically?
Yeah, I did. I saw him do a very short dove act. I think it was like 4 minutes long. And, one thing about Fernando, but a lot of young kids today, uh, they're exposed to so much magic on television and live performances or whatever. Uh, they could pick it up like crazy. I mean, when I was that young, it took me a week to learn how to do the die box or something, some mechanical trick. It didn't matter. It just took me a long time, especially if it involved a sleight of hand move. Uh, Fernando would look at it and pick it up and just do it. Just
Yeah,
amazing. But there would be other
I've
kids
seen it.
like
I've
that.
seen him do that. He's
Yeah,
such
yeah.
a quick learner. It's terrifying. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So,
That's
but of course, he was an assistant for me, a male assistant for me, on quite a number of shows before he actually went out and did his own show. And when he graduated from high school, he borrowed some illusions from a local guy there, Gary Peterson, uh, who he also worked for occasionally. Gary Peterson had a case company, still does, that makes road cases. And Gary bought a lot of illusions. Fernando borrowed those, and in his senior year in high school, put together a 1.5 hour full evening show. I could never have done that when I was that age. I mean, it was amazing. So I asked him, to be our assistant a number of times. Of course, he was paid for that. And then I took him to New Zealand. Uh, and he did his own act and then assisted us. And that was probably the first professional job he really had, I think. Uh,
So as I mentioned, I've been going through all these clips of you performing various illusions. I mean, something I've noticed that you do incredibly cleverly is combine illusions. That's something that,
okay.
or you'll combine methods or something like that. You've done it with a number of things. Is there one, or I guess they're two because they're paired, two that you combine together that you look back on now that you're sort of most proud of? Or
Well, two, yeah, the sword suspension and the eye of the needle, the barricaded barrels. Uh, so let's start with that one because that was the first one I did. I always liked the idea of the eye of the needle trick, Dante's barrel illusion, where the girl's in one barrel and it's blocked off by a panel and spikes, steel bars, and she goes into the other barrel. She's transferred from one to the other. But there's hardly any ending to it. I mean, and it's a lot to do about nothing, really. It takes so long to present the trick. Uh, then I remembered seeing Stan Allen and Mike Caveney did for a very short period of time an act together. And they closed the act by doing a substitution trunk, but they used a barrel, turned the barrel on end, stood on the top, and did a substitution trunk effect. So I just said, that's that's what should be added to the eye of the needle trick. The girl goes from one barrel to the other barrel, and then I end up in the barrel by doing a substitution trunk. So I had that built because I wasn't building magic yet then. I had that built in 1976, and we featured it on It's Magic for Milt Larson, which was a big thing to do. If you lived in LA and you were a magician and you were invited to perform for next to nothing, I must say, for Milt Larson on his It's Magic show, that was a big deal. So I built it for that. And then a few years later, it came around. Uh, young guy Kenny Whitaker had invented the impaled, where the girl is balanced on a sword and she slips and she's impaled. Well, again, it was a lot of buildup to a 45-second trick, and I wanted something different. He put that trick on the market. He sold it, and so he uh, said to me, "Do you want to buy one?" And I said, "Well, only if we can do it differently." And what if we did a sword suspension first, and then it became the impale? So that was
I
the
think
second.
this is Chuck. I think this is actually the most perfect example, actually, of your brilliant brain and your experience and your creativity to combine those two illusions is such a fantastic idea. You're right. They are both kind of good, but in a way they're too quick, over too quick, or they don't have a bit of an ending. But to have this whole sequence where the girl goes on top, the swords are taken away, and then for her to fall through, I think is absolutely 10 out of 10. I'm in awe of that. I really am. I think it's incredible.
That became our signature piece after Mismade Girl. And then the nightmare of all, I wanted to do a girl through glass, sliding the girl through a sheet of glass, and the number of methods that have been done over the years. But again, it was kind of, these penetration tricks. This
They
pushing
don't
it.
really get anything, do
That,
they,
that's
from an
right.
audience? Yeah.
So my routine, and the only times I ever did it, by the way, was in New Zealand and in Australia, and I think once at a magic convention in America because the setup was too great. But what it is I told the audience that the glass would turn to liquid if you provided enough energy. So we pushed the girl halfway through the glass and stopped, and I turn off the energy. The glass heals up, and it cuts the girl in half, and it now becomes a sawing in half trick.
Amazing.
And so the unit that she's on a sliding track, on a track on a sliding trolley covered in a box, and
Hmm.
her head and feet stick out. And halfway through the glass, we stop, we separate the halves, and it's like a thin saw sawing in half. And the glass is now solid, and the girl is in two parts. Um,
It's fantastic.
Yeah, so
Absolutely
that's
fantastic.
kind of the last of that theme that we did.
And of course, we're talking about grand scale illusions here, but the last one I just want to touch on is your version of spot card, which is a trick. Honestly, I can say I can't stand the trick. I've always thought, even when I was 4 years old, I knew exactly what was going on when someone would do it. And so I'm watching you do it. Fernando sent it to me. I was like, watch him do this. And so I'm watching it going, yeah, spot cards. And then suddenly I realized that I, as a professional magician with 25 years experience, have been sucker tricked because I don't have a clue how this trick is actually done because of the way you end it. It's just absolutely fantastic. So yeah, is that something you've been doing for a long time as well? Spot cards,
Yeah,
it's
well,
fantastic.
I started with it when I was about 17, 18 years old, and but not the current version. I just that developed over the years, and I must say, I can do that whole routine in a minute and a half, and I can stretch it out to 5 minutes when it's required.
So it's
you know,
always in the wing, then, is it? Just in case you have a problem.
exactly. Yep,
Yeah, that's what the
exactly.
pros do. I've heard a rumor that Copperfield has spot card in the wing at the MGM Grand in Vegas.
Somebody told me
Just
that. Yeah.
yeah, just in case he has a problem, he knows he can go and grab it and go to Chuck. Just to take this full circle, as I said at the beginning, a 65. You're saying now 70-year career, where you've just done so much, and I guess if I may ask you a slightly personal question, obviously you're at this point now where I guess most people would assume you would be retired, but you're not. And I know you have a beautiful house there in California, so I know it's not for financial reasons. Why have you kept going?
Oh,
And what is it that what advice can you? I've always believed, and regular listeners of this podcast will know, I've always believed retirement is a terrible idea. What do you think?
yeah. Uh, I have slowed down, definitely, but I haven't really retired. I've retired from performing illusions. I can't, because I wasn't the kind of an illusionist that stood on the side of the stage and waved my hands and let the assistants do all the work. I was running around on the stage, opening the doors and lifting the girl out of the box and whatever it was. So I can't do that anymore. But I can still do a stand up. Basically, it's full circle. I can do what I started out doing when I was 17, 16, 17 years old. And so I really work the Magic Castle primarily. It's right here in LA. I mean, close to where we are, where we live, and it's an easy gig if I don't bring the illusions in. At one point in time, really only about 5 or 6 years ago, before the pandemic. I did the full stage show at the castle, 45 minutes, and we did like 6 illusions. Uh, the real magic there was to keep the illusions backstage someplace, and because the stage is so small. But obviously, I don't do that anymore, and but I still enjoy performing, of course.
Of course. Well, this has been an amazing conversation with you. It's been good that Hudson hasn't been here because he wouldn't have got a word in edgeways. Because I had a well, everyone listening to this who knows me knows I've been here in the UK. We say a pig in shit for the last hour, talking to a stage illusionist with decades of experience. It's been amazing chatting to you, Chuck. And I wonder if I could be uh, politely ask you to play our game 20 magic questions to finish the episode. Were you happy to do this?
Yeah, sure.
All right, here we go. Let's hit the music. Get the band going. All right, question one, Chuck Jones. If you had to be trapped on a desert island with one magician, who would it be?
Keller,
Ah. Question two. What is
very
the first
creative.
thing?
You know, he's so creative.
What is the first thing you do in the morning?
Go back to bed.
Hey, we're the same. That's exactly what I do. This will be interesting with all of your experience. What is the best magic show you ever saw?
Okay. Well, because of the sheer spectacle, it has to be Siegfried and Roy.
I wish I'd seen
The
it.
the last Vegas version, Siegfried and Roy.
Yeah. Question four. What is a magic trick you wish magicians would stop doing?
Mismade Girl.
Yes, I love it. Question five. Who is the most famous person you've done a trick for?
Okay, Michael Jackson. We were at Neverland
Amazing.
Ranch for Michael 4 times, and the very first time, if I may add this, there were 4 people in the audience: Michael, 2 kids, and 1 mother, one of the kids' mothers, and that was the whole audience. And we did a full stage show for Michael and 3 other people.
Amazing. Who is the first magician you saw live?
So that would be Dell O Dell, the female magician that I had mentioned. And yeah, she taught me a lot about show business and magic when I was 12, 13, 14 years old.
Who is the magician you text or speak to the most?
Oh, there are 3 local guys here that your audience would never have heard of. But Richard Burr is an illusionist. He lives about half a mile away. And my friend Kerry Ross is a comedy magician. And I talk to them practically every day. Yeah. But
What
it's
is your
not
favorite?
always, yeah, it's not always about magic. You know, it's just really good friends. So,
What is your favorite magic book?
Harbin. That was one
Yes.
of the first illusion books I bought.
Do
years
you
ago.
have one? Do
Yeah.
you have an
Yeah.
actual Harbin book? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it legit or is it hooky one?
Oh no, it's legit. Yeah, he
It's
numbered them, you know, and then he signed them.
If you ever want to sell that, Chuck, you give me a call.
Okay.
What is a gig you'd love to do? I mean, you did everything, but was there a gig that you would love to have done that you didn't, or one you'd maybe still love to do?
Well, I wouldn't do it now, but at one time I would have liked to have done Las Vegas for a couple of years. People like Johnny Thompson had a run in Vegas for 3 or 4 years, as well as Rick Thomas and whatever. Now, I worked in review shows, the MGM Grand in Reno, one of the biggest review shows in the world at the time. So it was like that, but it was not in Las Vegas. Yeah.
It's always great to ask a stage illusionist this. What is the most expensive magic purchase you've ever made?
That would not be an illusion. That would be music.
Oh, interesting. You
Okay,
paid to have some music recorded by an orchestra or something?
not recorded. I needed to have charts made for 21 musicians for the MGM Grand Show in Reno. And at that time, for a 12-minute act, it cost me $12,000 to have the
Wow.
music written uh, for that act. And then I had to repeat it when you can go into the reason. But we added additional illusions and additional tricks. And so I spent probably another $6,000 or $7,000 for orchestrations for that show.
Amazing. What is a trick or routine you'd love to do that you can't?
Oh, what did I think of? What was it? Uh, you know, probably any number of close-up card tricks because I'm not really, I never really got into close-up. So any number of close-up card tricks. I do close-up magic, sponge balls and stuff like that, but some of the really difficult sleight card tricks.
If you had to do an allusion to music, what song would you use?
One I really love is James Horner has did a movie called Rocketeer for Disney, and there's a couple of pieces in that I just love and I've used over, and I gave to Fernando to use for the ladder suspension. James Horner probably has to his credit maybe 100 films that he's written scores for. The most famous is the Titanic. He wrote all the music for Titanic.
A lot of people don't know this either. James Horner was. I'm a big fan of James Horner, and he had a rather tragic passing, didn't he? He died quite young. It's very, very sad.
Yeah.
Well, especially when you look at like John Williams and stuff, and you realise that John Williams did his best work as an older guy, and James Horner was already doing incredible work as a younger conductor. It's really sad. I'm a big fan of James Horner's. What is the biggest lie magicians tell themselves?
They read their own publicity and believe it.
Yeah, all their own reviews and believe that. If you believe the good reviews, you've got to believe the bad ones. Okay, what's something in magic you've been putting off?
Writing a book.
Yeah, you should do that, Chuck, definitely. You really should. Who is a dead magician you wish you could have a chat with?
Marvin Roy. A good friend. Yeah.
If you had to get a magic tattoo, what would it be of and where?
But I'm not a tattoo person, so maybe Mismade Girl.
Love it. Where is the best place magic has taken you?
Well, I would say maybe a toss-up. I really love going to Australia. I've been there many times. But the most exciting place, and it was the first time out of the country, was Singapore. So that would be my other choice. Yeah.
What is the last thing you do at night?
Have a nightcap.
And Chuck, I'm just going to be honest. This next question isn't technically relevant today, but I am going to ask it to you because recently our subscriber Darren Fissell has put together a spreadsheet of how I am doing in this question. Let's just say I'm not doing very well. And as Hudson has not been here today, I'm guessing if I ask you the question, who have you enjoyed speaking to more today, Young or Hudson, your answer would be?
Hudson.
Oh,
I don't know Hudson, unfortunately,
right.
But I do know you. Yeah,
Hudson saw you. Hudson saw you on your UK tour.
Oh,
actually.
Is that
It's
right?
a shame he's not here. It's a shame he's not here. Yes, he remembers seeing you in the UK many, many years ago. And here we go, Chuck Jones. Question 20. Please give us your Mount Rushmore of magic, your personal 4 magician heroes.
Oh, boy. So I think I wrote down Marvin Roy, Lance Burton, Billy McComb, and I left somebody out, and I can't think right now.
You could say Richard Young, and it could be my first time on Mount Rushmore. What do you think?
There you are. There you go. There's a space for you.
There you go. It's official. Finally, I've been put up on Mount Rushmore by a magician. It's only taken like 45 episodes or something. Chuck, this has been brilliant. It's been a great week in Magic here. It's all been kicking off at the Magic Circle with the Council. I've had the best time. And then I've just got to sit down with you and chat to you about illusions for an hour. It's been absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for being a guest on our podcast, Chuck. Have you had a good time? I really hope you have.
Yeah. Very enjoyable. Good. And I must say, I really, in Champions of Magic, I enjoyed your act with Strange, and I love the name too, Young and Strange. I think that's a fabulous name for that.
I appreciate that. I remember you came to see us in Anaheim, didn't you? And we were genuinely very nervous knowing you were in the audience. Knowing that
is that right?
This legend was out there who's been around, seen it and done it all. It added an extra layer of pressure that night. And so that means a lot to he said. Thanks so much, Chuck, for being on the podcast. Thank you so much to the subscriber for listening. Listen, if you missed it, last Wednesday, I added the most amazing podcast to our feed, which is a Edinburgh Fringe preview 2024, all of the magic shows that are going to be at the Edinburgh Fringe this August. Myself and Rob James sat down and went through the brochure, and we've highlighted some great shows that we think you should know about that are going to be there next month. And also at the beginning, the first 15 minutes of the podcast, we give you some great tips if it's going to be your first trip up there this year. Go and check it out. It's absolutely brilliant. And I really think you'll enjoy it. Thank you so much again, Chuck. Thank you to the subscriber for listening. And I'll see you again with Hudson. He'll be back next Friday. We're going to be talking to Magic Sing. It's going to be brilliant. All right, take care. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.